It started with a smell. I'd been renting the old farmhouse for a few weeks, thinking it would be a perfect getaway from the chaos of city life. It was quiet, surrounded by fields that stretched endlessly in every direction. The creaky floorboards and drafty windows were charming at first, the kind of quirks you expect from a house older than your grandparents'. But then came the smell. At first, it was faint, just a whiff of something sour like rotting fruit left too long in the sun. I noticed it most in the evenings, when the house was still and the wind outside had died. By the third night, it had grown stronger, pungent and cloying, clinging to the air like an invisible fog. I searched the house from top to bottom, convinced some forgotten piece of food or dead animal was rotting somewhere. The cupboards were empty, the fridge spotless, the attic dusty but clean. There was nothing to explain the stench. Then I noticed the hatch. It was in the kitchen, tucked under a faded rug I'd barely paid attention to. The edges of the rug were curled slightly, as if it had been hastily thrown there to cover something. My heart sank as I pulled it back, revealing a square wooden hatch set into the floor. I stared at it for a long moment, my gut twisting. The smell was stronger here, seeping through the cracks between the boards. The wood looked old and splintered, the kind that might fall apart if you stepped on it wrong. I told myself it was just a root cellar. That made sense, didn't it? Old farmhouses like this always had root cellars for storing vegetables or canned goods. There was no reason for the unease creeping up my spine, but I hesitated anyway. Eventually, curiosity, or maybe frustration, got the better of me. I grabbed the rusty iron handle and pulled. The hatch groaned as it opened, the hinges stiff with age. The smell hit me like a punch to the face, thick and overwhelming. I gagged, covering my nose and mouth as I peered into the darkness below. The cellar was deeper than I expected, its walls rough and uneven, carved straight from the earth. A wooden ladder led down into the shadows, but the bottom wasn't visible. The air that wafted up was damp and cold, carrying with it a faint, rhythmic sound, like something dripping, steady, and deliberate. I should have closed the hatch right then and there. I should have put the rug back and left it alone, but instead, I grabbed a flashlight. The flashlight's beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating the rough wooden ladder descending into the cellar. The rhythmic dripping sound continued, faint but steady, and the smell was worse now, cloying, sour, and thick enough to coat my tongue. I hesitated at the edge, gripping the sides of the hatch. Every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone, to slam the hatch shut and forget I'd ever opened it. But something about the cellar felt wrong. It wasn't just the smell or the dripping. It was the stillness, the way the air seemed to press against me, heavy and expectant. I climbed down. The ladder groaned under my weight, the wood damp and slightly soft. The flashlight trembled in my hand, its beam bouncing off the dirt walls as I descended. The deeper I went, the colder the air became, sinking into my skin like icy needles. When my feet finally touched the ground, I paused, shining the flashlight around. The cellar was larger than I'd expected, far larger. The walls curved outward, forming a chamber that stretched beyond the reach of the light. The floor was uneven, packed dirt littered with broken bits of wood and stone. There were no shelves, no jars of pickled vegetables, none of the things I'd expected to find in a root cellar. Instead, there were scratches. They covered the walls in long, uneven streaks carved deep into the earth. Some were straight, others jagged, crisscrossing each other in chaotic patterns. I stepped closer, running my fingers over the grooves. They were too deep, too deliberate to be from animals or erosion. The rhythmic dripping grew louder, drawing my attention to the far end of the chamber. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, the beam revealing a second opening, a narrow tunnel leading even deeper into the earth. The smell was unbearable now, the kind of stench that made my stomach churn and my eyes water. But more than that, I felt it again, the weight, the oppressive stillness, like the air itself was alive and holding its breath. I should have gone back up. I should have climbed the ladder, shut the hatch, and walked away. Instead, I took a step toward the tunnel. The flashlight's beam flickered as I moved, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. The tunnel's entrance loomed ahead, a jagged black maw carved into the dirt. And then I saw them. Footprints. They were faint, barely visible in the packed dirt, but unmistakably human. They led from the base of the ladder to the tunnel and disappeared into the darkness beyond. My heart pounded as I stared at them, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I wasn't alone. The footprints led straight into the tunnel, their edges blurred as if the dirt had been disturbed recently. My stomach tightened as I stared at them, the flashlight shaking in my hand. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing faintly. The only response was the steady drip of water, its rhythm growing louder as it resonated from somewhere deep within the tunnel. I didn't want to go further. My body screamed at me to turn back, to climb the ladder and never think about this place again. But the footprints gnawed at me, their presence like a challenge I couldn't ignore. I stepped forward. The tunnel walls were close, forcing me to hunch slightly as I moved. The air was damp and cold, brushing against my skin like icy breath. The flashlight's beam flickered as it illuminated the rough, uneven walls, their surfaces scarred with more of those strange, erratic scratches. The smell was worse here, so strong it made my eyes water. It wasn't just sour anymore. It was putrid, the unmistakable stench of rot. I pulled my shirt up over my nose, but it did little to block the odor. The footprints continued, leading deeper into the tunnel, their path winding and uneven. The ground beneath my feet was soft and damp, squelching faintly with each step. The dripping sound was louder now, its steady rhythm echoing in my ears. I scanned the walls, searching for its source, but the tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, the darkness swallowing the light of the flashlight. And then I heard it, a faint scuffling sound just ahead, like someone or something moving. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Hello," I called again, my voice trembling. The scuffling stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, so heavy it pressed against my ears. I held my breath, straining to hear, and for a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own pounding pulse. Then the flashlight flickered. The beam dimmed, sputtered, and for a terrifying second, the tunnel was plunged into complete darkness. My breath caught, and I slapped the side of the flashlight, the light flaring back to life just in time to catch movement in the corner of my eye. Something darted across the edge of the beam, quick and low to the ground. I whipped the flashlight toward it, my hands shaking, but the tunnel was empty. The scuffling started again, louder this time, coming from somewhere deeper in the darkness. I backed away, my steps uneven, but the sound seemed to follow, growing closer with every passing second. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The scuffling stopped again, replaced by something worse. A faint, wet breathing, heavy and labored, echoing from just ahead. I raised the flashlight, its beam trembling as I pointed it toward the sound. At the far end of the tunnel, just at the edge of the light, something moved. A figure crouched low to the ground, its body pale and skeletal, its limbs too long and thin to be human. Its head snapped toward me, and for a brief moment, I saw its eyes, glinting black orbs that seemed to pierce straight through me. The breathing grew louder, faster, as the figure began to crawl toward me. The figure moved unnaturally, its limbs bending in ways that made my stomach churn. Its bony hands dug into the damp ground, pulling it forward in short, jerky motions, each movement accompanied by that wet, ragged breathing. "Stay back," I shouted, the flashlight trembling in my grip. The beam caught its face, or what should have been a face. The skin was stretched tight over its skull, pale and glistening, its mouth a gaping maw of jagged, yellow teeth. Those black, reflective eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a cold, creeping dread that rooted me in place. It didn't stop. I stumbled backward, my feet slipping on the wet dirt as I tried to put distance between us. The flashlight's beam flickered, the light dimming just as the figure lunged forward. "No!" I screamed, turning and bolting toward the ladder. The tunnel seemed to close in around me, the air thick and oppressive, the smell of rot so overpowering I gagged as I ran. The sound of the creature's pursuit was deafening, scraping, scuttling, and that horrible, guttural breathing growing closer with every step. The ladder loomed ahead, illuminated by the faint light spilling down from the kitchen above. Relief surged through me as I reached for the rungs, my fingers gripping the slick, splintered wood. The creature let out a guttural hiss, and I felt something cold and sharp graze my ankle. I kicked out instinctively, my boot connecting with a wet, fleshy mass. The creature screeched, the sound piercing and inhuman, and I scrambled up the ladder, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I threw myself through the hatch, slamming it shut behind me with all my weight. My hands fumbled for the rug, dragging it back over the hatch as though the thin fabric could somehow keep that thing below. The kitchen was silent except for the sound of my own labored breathing. The smell of rot lingered, faint but still present, and the oppressive weight of the cellar seemed to seep through the floor. I sat there for what felt like hours, clutching the flashlight and staring at the rug, waiting for the hatch to burst open. But it didn't. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. I told myself it was over, that the thing, whatever it was trapped down there unable to climb out. And then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from beneath the hatch. The tapping was soft at first, almost too faint to hear over my pounding heartbeat. But as I sat there, frozen on the kitchen floor, it grew louder, steady and deliberate, like knuckles rapping against wood. I stared at the rug covering the hatch, my breath hitching with each tap. The sound wasn't frantic or chaotic. It was measured, almost patient. "No," I whispered, shaking my head as though I could will it away. "No, no, no." The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It pressed against my ears, thick and suffocating, making every creak of the house feel like a warning. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing a chair and shoving it over the hatch. My hands shook as I wedged its legs tightly against the handle, creating a makeshift barricade. It wasn't much, but it made me feel like I was doing something. I backed away, my eyes never leaving the spot where the hatch lay hidden beneath the rug. The flashlight was still clutched in my hand, its beam unsteady as it cast jagged shadows across the room. The tapping returned. This time it was louder, more insistent. Each knock sent a shiver down my spine, the sound vibrating through the floorboards under my feet. "Leave me alone!" I shouted, though my voice cracked. The tapping stopped again, replaced by a new sound, a low, guttural scratching, like nails dragging across wood. It was slow and deliberate, each scrape setting my teeth on edge. I stumbled back further, pressing myself against the kitchen counter. My mind raced, grasping for some explanation that didn't involve the thing I'd seen in the cellar. Maybe it was an animal, I told myself, a raccoon, or a stray dog that had gotten stuck down there. But deep down I knew better. The scratching stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was deafening. My chest tightened, my breath catching as I stared at the hatch, waiting for whatever was beneath it to make its next move. And then, faintly, I heard it, a voice. At first, it was barely audible, just a soft murmur that blended with the hum of the refrigerator. But as it grew louder, I realized it wasn't just any voice. It was mine. "Help me," it whispered, warped and distorted but unmistakably my own. "Please let me out." I froze, my blood running cold. The voice came again, louder this time, the tone desperate and pleading. "I'm stuck. You have to help me." My knees nearly gave out as I backed into the counter, shaking my head. "You're not real," I whispered, clutching the flashlight tighter. "You're not real." The voice shifted, becoming softer, calmer. "It's okay," it said, its cadence eerily soothing. "I won't hurt you. Just open the door." The chair over the hatch creaked as the handle rattled faintly. My hand shot to my mouth, stifling a scream. The voice grew colder, sharper. "Let me out." The hatch thudded against the chair, the force of the blow sending a shudder through the floor. "Let me out." The flashlight flickered, the beam stuttering in the dim kitchen light as the hatch thudded again, harder this time. And then the voice stopped. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, and for a moment, I dared to believe it was over. But then I heard the faint sound of footsteps. They weren't coming from the cellar. They were coming from behind me. The footsteps were soft but deliberate, each one sending a jolt of cold fear down my spine. They came from just behind me, so close that I swore I could feel the faint vibration of them through the floorboards. I froze, my body stiff and unresponsive, the flashlight clutched tightly in my trembling hand. My mind screamed at me to turn around, to see what was there, but every muscle in my body refused to obey. "Let me out," the voice repeated softly. It wasn't coming from the cellar anymore. The air around me grew colder, the smell of rot intensifying until it was unbearable. My stomach churned, and I gagged, barely managing to keep the bile down. The footsteps stopped, slowly, as if dragged by an unseen force. My head began to turn. The shadows cast by the flickering flashlight danced wildly across the walls, their shapes twisting and shifting like they were alive. And then I saw it. Standing in the dim light, just behind the kitchen table, was a figure. It wasn't the creature from the cellar, not exactly. Its form was more solid, almost human in shape, but its face was all wrong. The skin was pale and stretched too tight, the eyes black and glossy, like twin pools of oil. And it was smiling. The jagged grin stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. It tilted its head, the motion unnervingly smooth, and took a slow, deliberate step toward me. "Thank you," it said, the words dripping with mockery. Its voice was mine, but twisted and warped, as if filtered through something inhuman. I stumbled backward, the counter digging into my back as I tried to put distance between us. What? What do you want?" I choked out, my voice barely above a whisper. The thing didn't answer. Instead, it raised one long, bony finger and pointed toward the hatch. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not opening it. You can't make me." The smile widened. "You already did," it whispered. My stomach dropped. The chair over the hatch rattled violently, the sound echoing through the kitchen. The thudding from below returned, louder and more frantic, as if something, or someone, was slamming against the wooden door with all its strength. I turned back to the figure, but it was gone. The room was empty again, save for the relentless pounding from the cellar. The flashlight flickered, its beam growing weaker, and I felt the cold presence pressing in around me. The air was heavy, suffocating, and the edges of my vision blurred as panic took hold. The chair over the hatch slid to the side, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. "No!" I screamed, lunging toward it. I grabbed the chair, shoving it back into place, but the hatch was already opening. The wood groaned as the door lifted slightly, a pale hand emerging from the darkness below. It wasn't human. The fingers were too long, the skin mottled and gray, the nails jagged and sharp. They gripped the edge of the hatch, pulling it open inch by inch, despite my desperate efforts to hold it shut. "Stop!" I cried, pressing all my weight against the chair. "Go back!" The thing below hissed, a wet, guttural sound that sent a shiver through my entire body. The hatch slammed once, twice, the force of the blows shaking the floor. And then with one final push, it burst open. The hatch flew open with a force that knocked me backward, my head striking the edge of the counter. Stars danced in my vision as I hit the floor, the flashlight skittering out of my hand and spinning wildly, casting erratic beams of light across the kitchen. From the depths of the cellar came the thing. Its pale, elongated hands gripped the edges of the hatch as it hauled itself upward, its long, thin limbs bending and cracking unnaturally. The creature's head emerged first, its glossy black eyes catching the flickering light. The jagged grin on its face widened as it pulled itself further into the room, the sickly stench of rot intensifying with every movement. I scrambled backward, my hands slipping on the smooth floor as my heart hammered in my chest. "No," I whispered, the word barely audible over the sound of its labored breathing. "Stay back." The creature tilted its head, the motion too smooth, too deliberate. Its grin stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of uneven, yellow teeth. "You called me," it said, its voice a low, guttural rasp that sent shivers through my body. "I didn't," I stammered, shaking my head. "I didn't call you. I don't even know what you are." The thing slithered further into the room, its movements fluid and unnatural. Its limbs were impossibly long, its fingers tipped with jagged claws that scraped against the floor. The flashlight's beam caught its full form for the first time, and my stomach churned. Its body was gaunt, almost skeletal, with patches of mottled, decaying flesh clinging to its frame. The sound of its claws dragging across the floorboards was unbearable, like nails on a chalkboard magnified tenfold. It stopped just a few feet from me, crouching low to the ground. Its black eyes gleamed with a cold, alien intelligence, and its grin widened further. "You opened the door," it said, its voice mocking and hollow. "Now you must finish what you started." "I didn't mean to," I cried, my voice breaking. "I didn't know." The creature's grin faltered, and for the first time, its expression shifted. Anger. "You didn't know?" It hissed, its voice rising. "You didn't know?" The kitchen seemed to darken as the creature loomed over me, its gaunt form stretching impossibly tall. The cold around me deepened, and the metallic tang in the air became overwhelming, choking me. "You brought me here," it growled, its voice reverberating through the room. "You called to me, and now you will pay the price." My hands found the flashlight, and without thinking, I turned the beam directly onto the creature's face. It shrieked a high-pitched, inhuman sound that made my ears ring. The thing recoiled, its long limbs flailing as it scrambled away from the light. The whispers returned, faint and fragmented, but their urgency was clear. "Get up! Run!" I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled to my feet, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline, and bolted toward the door. The creature roared behind me, the sound shaking the walls, but I didn't dare look back. The whispers grew louder, guiding me. "Do not stop. Do not look back." I tore through the kitchen, the cold air clawing at my skin, and stumbled into the hallway. The front door was ahead, its outline faint in the darkness, and I ran for it, my heart pounding like a drum. Behind me, the creature roared again, its guttural screeches echoing through the house. And then the floor beneath me shifted. The ground beneath my feet groaned, a deep, resonant sound that sent vibrations up my legs. I skidded to a stop, my flashlight jerking wildly as I fought to stay upright. The hallway stretched before me, the front door tantalizingly close, but the floor shifted again, the boards creaking and bowing inward. Behind me, the creature screeched, the sound piercing and furious. I turned the flashlight back, catching a glimpse of its gaunt form scrambling toward me, its limbs contorting unnaturally as it dragged itself forward. The light hit its eyes, and it recoiled again, hissing like a cornered animal. The whispers surged in my ears, their voices frantic. "Move! You cannot stay here." I darted forward, the floor groaning with every step. The wood felt spongy beneath my boots, as though it were no longer solid. With each movement, the ground seemed to sag further, the creaking escalating into a low, ominous rumble. And then it gave way. The floor collapsed beneath me, the boards splintering with a deafening crack. For a heart-stopping moment, I was weightless, plummeting into the darkness below. The flashlight slipped from my grasp, its beam spinning wildly before it clattered out of sight. I hit the ground hard, the impact jarring every bone in my body. A sharp pain shot through my ankle, and I gasped, struggling to push myself upright. The smell was overwhelming now, thick, cloying, and nauseating. The air was damp and cold, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed in the darkness. I fumbled for the flashlight, my fingers scraping against the rough, dirt-packed ground. The light was still on, casting a weak, flickering beam that illuminated the space around me. I was back in the cellar. The jagged walls loomed overhead, their surfaces scarred with deep scratches and strange, twisting patterns. The footprints I'd seen earlier were gone, replaced by long, uneven gouges that crisscrossed the floor like the frantic claw marks marks of something trying to escape. The whispers returned, faint and fractured. "It knows you are here." A low growl rumbled through the air, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The flashlight's beams swept across the chamber, landing on a darkened tunnel at the far end. From the shadows, the creature emerged. It was faster now, its movements more aggressive and purposeful. Its pale, skeletal frame stretched unnaturally as it dragged itself closer, its glossy black eyes locked on mine. I staggered to my feet, pain lancing through my ankle as I tried to put weight on it. The flashlight shook in my hand, its beam barely enough to hold the creature at bay. The whispers screamed in my ears. "Run! Do not let it reach you!" I limped toward the tunnel, the sound of the creature's claws scraping against the ground growing louder behind me. Each step sent sharp jolts of pain through my leg, but I didn't stop. The tunnel was narrow and cramped, forcing me to hunch as I moved. The walls seemed to close in around me, the air thick and suffocating. The creature roared, its voice reverberating through the tunnel like a shockwave. The light from the flashlight flickered again, its beam dimming as the batteries began to die. I bit back a cry, my breaths coming in shallow gasps as I pressed forward. The whispers grew louder, their tone urgent and panicked. "You must reach the end. Do not stop." The tunnel twisted sharply, and I nearly lost my balance as the ground beneath me sloped downward. My ankle throbbed, but the adrenaline surging through me drowned out the pain. And then I saw it, a faint light ahead, glowing dimly at the end of the tunnel. The whispers rose in a crescendo. "Hurry! It is coming!" The creature's guttural growl was right behind me now, the sound of its claws scraping against the dirt deafening. I pushed myself forward, each step a battle against the pain and the rising panic threatening to consume me. The light grew brighter as I stumbled toward it, the air around me growing colder with every step. The whispers fell silent as I reached the end of the tunnel, their voices replaced by a single, chilling word. "Turn." The faint light at the end of the tunnel grew brighter, illuminating the space in an unnatural glow. My breaths came in short, panicked gasps as I hobbled forward, the flashlight flickering weakly in my trembling hand. The whisper's final command echoed in my mind. "Turn." The tunnel opened into a small chamber, its walls carved from smooth stone that seemed to glisten faintly in the strange light. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, its surface cracked and weathered with age. Resting on it was a small, brass object, a key. The key looked old, its surface tarnished and pitted, but it seemed to pulse faintly with an inner light, as though it were alive. Behind me, the creature roared, its guttural cry reverberating through the tunnel and rattling my teeth. The sound of its claws scraping against the dirt was deafening now, each movement bringing it closer. The whispers surged again, sharp and urgent. "Turn the key. Seal the door." "What door?" I shouted, my voice cracking as I staggered toward the pedestal. The whispers didn't answer. Instead, the light around the chamber began to dim, and the oppressive cold deepened, sinking into my skin like icy needles. The creature burst into the chamber, its skeletal form twisting and writhing as it crawled through the tunnel's opening. Its black eyes gleamed in the dim light, its jagged grin stretching wider as it spotted me. "You cannot stop this," it hissed, its voice layered and inhuman. "You opened the way." I grabbed the key. The moment my fingers touched the brass, a shockwave of cold rippled through the chamber, and the whispers screamed in unison. "Turn it!" The creature lunged toward me, its claws outstretched. I stumbled backward, my injured ankle buckling as I fell to the ground. The key pulsed in my hand, its light flaring brightly as the whispers grew deafening. With shaking hands, I turned toward the pedestal. The stone beneath it shifted, the surface splitting open to reveal a small, circular lock. It was ancient, the edges worn smooth, but it matched the key perfectly. The creature roared, its massive limbs scraping against the floor as it closed the distance between us. I jammed the key into the lock, twisting it with all my strength. The room shook violently, the air filled with a piercing, otherworldly screech. The walls around me seemed to ripple and distort, the light from the key flaring brighter and brighter until it was blinding. The creature shrieked, its form unraveling as the light consumed it. Its limbs twisted and contorted, black smoke pouring from its body as it was dragged backward toward the tunnel. "You cannot stop this," it screamed, its voice a distorted wail. "You cannot seal what is already free." The key turned fully, locking into place with a final, resonant click. The light exploded outward, engulfing the chamber in a blinding brilliance. The creature's screams faded into the void, its form dissolving into the air like ash caught in the wind. And then silence. The light dimmed, the oppressive cold lifting as the chamber settled into stillness. My hands shook as I pulled the key from the lock, its surface now cool and dull. The whispers were gone. The tunnel behind me was empty, the air heavy with the scent of earth, but free of the creature's foul stench. I stared at the key, my chest heaving, and felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I had sealed something away, but I knew, deep down, that it wasn't over. The chamber was still, the oppressive cold replaced by an eerie silence that pressed against my ears. The key rested in my trembling hand, its glow extinguished, leaving the space dim and lifeless. For a brief moment, I let myself believe it was over. The creature was gone, its twisted form dissolved into nothing, and the whispers had fallen silent. But the weight of the key in my hand felt heavier now, as though it carried something unseen. I tried to stand, but my injured ankle buckled beneath me, sending a sharp jolt of pain through my leg. Gritting my teeth, I leaned against the pedestal, the rough stone digging into my palms as I steadied myself. The air in the chamber began to shift. It wasn't the suffocating cold from before. It was something subtler, a faint vibration that seemed to resonate in my chest. The key pulsed faintly in my hand, its once dull surface glinting faintly in the dim light. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "It's done." I locked it away. The vibrations grew stronger, the ground beneath me trembling slightly. From the tunnel behind me came a soft, distant sound, dripping water, faint and rhythmic. I turned, the flashlight trembling as I aimed its weak beam toward the tunnel. The light barely penetrated the darkness, but the sound grew louder, closer, until it echoed through the chamber. And then the whispers returned. "It is not over." The words were faint, almost mournful, but they sent a cold shiver down my spine. The tunnel loomed before me, its entrance a gaping maw that seemed to stretch impossibly wide. I clutched the key tighter, my mind racing. I had turned the lock. I had sealed the door. So, why did it feel like something had been left behind? The whispers surged again, louder now, overlapping and chaotic. "It cannot hold. The door is weak. The seal must be strengthened." I backed away from the tunnel, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "I can't go back. I did what you told me to do." The whispers softened, their tone almost pleading. "If you leave, it will break free." The key pulsed again, the faint glow returning to its surface. My fingers tightened around it as the vibrations in the air grew stronger, the ground beneath me trembling violently. The pedestal cracked, a jagged fissure splitting its surface as the light from the key flared brighter. The walls of the chamber rippled, their smooth surfaces twisting into chaotic patterns. From the tunnel came a low, guttural growl. My heart sank. The creature wasn't gone. The whispers rose in a frenzied crescendo, their voices weaving into a single, urgent command. "Seal it, now!" I stumbled back to the pedestal, the key trembling in my hand. The fissure in its surface had widened, revealing a second lock beneath the first. The jagged edges glowed faintly, their light pulsing in time with the vibrations that shook the chamber. The growl from the tunnel grew louder, closer. I shoved the key into the second lock, twisting it with all my strength. The resistance was greater this time, the metal grinding against the stone as the lock slowly turned. The whispers screamed, their voices filling the air. "Turn it! Seal it!" The tunnel behind me erupted with a deafening roar, and I felt the cold presence surge toward me. The creature's shadow loomed at the edge of the chamber, its jagged form writhing as it clawed its way forward. With a final, desperate push, I turned the key. The lock clicked into place, and the chamber erupted with light, brighter than anything I had ever seen. The creature let out a final, ear-piercing shriek as the light consumed it, its form dissolving into smoke and shadow. The whispers fell silent, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. The pedestal glowed brightly for a moment before the light dimmed, fading into nothingness. The vibration stopped, and the chamber fell still. I collapsed to the ground, clutching the key as the silence enveloped me. When I opened my eyes, the tunnel was gone. The chamber's walls were smooth and unbroken, and the oppressive cold had vanished. The key in my hand was lifeless now, its surface dull and ordinary. But I knew it wasn't over. The whispers had said the seal must be strengthened. But for how long? Days? Years? Centuries? I climbed to my feet, limping toward the faint outline of an exit that had appeared in the chamber wall. As I stepped through, I felt the weight of the key in my pocket, heavier than ever. The creature might have been locked away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting. And now, so was I.